and welcome to another Arsecast Extra, as always, with James from Gunnerblog. James, good morning to you.
Good morning, Andrew. Did you remember to plug your microphone in today? I'm just asking because it's important to check people remember the kind of basic tenets of their job, you know?
Of course. I did remember.
You connected to the internet?
Did.
Amazing. Do you keep some sort of list to help you with this stuff?
I just know it. You know, it's part and parcel of what I do. It's so ingrained in everything that I just simply couldn't forget. Such a fundamental part of my job. I don't know how it would be possible for anybody to do anything like that. Do you?
Sure. I don't know. You know, I'm trying to think if I was a firefighter.
Got your hose?
Might be a day where I just forgot to put the fire out.
Yeah.
You know, I drove up to the burning building and I saw the flames and I heard the screams and then I just, you know, absentmindedly drove away again.
Bee-ba. Off in your, yeah.
You know when you walk into a room and you're like, what did I come in here for?
Yes.
That, you know, Lee Mason had that exact experience. What am I doing in here again?
What?
Doesn't matter. Give a goal, I guess.
What is that? What's that big green thing they're all standing on?
I honestly, I mean, who knows what happened in that mind in that moment?
I am suspicious. I won't lie to you, I'm suspicious. I have concerns that are nagging away at me around
Andrew,
this thing.
That's
as much
ludicrous. Everyone knows our title rivals Manchester City are whiter than white. They are innocent until proven guilty, as Pep Guardiola made very clear the other day.
They are. Oh, even
this
though
is
they've
a clean fight.
They've already been found guilty, apparently, even though they're innocent until proven guilty, according to Pep, anyway.
Yes.
So guilty.
I think we can find Lee Mason guilty. I'm not sure Lee Mason warrants a trial.
You think it's just straight to firing squad?
To execution, I guess. I don't know. It's extraordinary. I know that you're suspicious. I watched Match of the Day this morning belatedly, and I found their argument quite compelling, where they basically said he panicked because it took so long to check the first one. And while that is, of course, woefully insufficient as an explanation or excuse, I do find it quite plausible, to be honest. Sometimes it takes so long to put one fire out that you just have to let the next house burn down. That's the first rule of firefighting.
I don't even know where to start on this, because I am genuinely, even by the standards of PGMOL, even by the standards of Lee Mason, even by some of the decisions that we saw this weekend, was like there were fucking fires all over the place, and the firemen were turning up and just letting them burn. Scorched earth policy.
Have you heard the good news, by the way, about John Brooks, the video assistant referee for the Brighton game?
Oh, the guy who drew the line in the wrong place.
Yes.
Right. What's the good news?
He is scheduled to be on VAR duty, I believe, for Arsenal's match against Manchester City on Wednesday.
I mean, where do you
What
even
if
start?
our centre-backs, our defenders, carry big, wide poles, you know, like tightrope walkers? So effectively, they are their own line. Would that work?
It might do. Remember, George Graham used to tie the back four together in training, and to synchronize their movements. Maybe Mikel Arteta will have to do something like that.
I mean, I'll just say now. I mean, I've seen that news online, so it is secondhand information, but I imagine it is true.
There's no better place to get information than
online. Everything on Twitter's true, right? That can't happen. Can it?
I mean, it can. It shouldn't. But would you be surprised if it did?
Well, there's a summit, isn't there? There's some sort of summit.
Howard Webb has taken time off from appearing on Sky Sports with
flirting
Neville.
with Carragher and Neville. And now he's going to actually have a meeting.
What's he going to say? Lads, will you stop being so shit? Come on, you can do better than that, can't you?
I think we talked about it a week or two ago, like when does he actually start? And it turns out he has started mid-season, but I was reading a couple of pieces today that were kind of saying that he's relatively powerless as to what he can change at the midpoint of a season. Certainly in terms of personnel, there are some, limitations placed on him until the summer. So everyone's like, oh, well, in the summer, they'll sort things out. But the summer is too late for us.
You don't draw any line between him starting mid-season and the refereeing going off a fucking cliff?
Andrew,
mid-season?
I always draw lines. Drawing lines is imperative.
I never forget to draw my lines.
Yeah.
Ever.
So if there's a line to be drawn, then I draw the line at not drawing the line. But
you're no Lee Mason, that's for sure.
I've forgotten what your actual question was. I was so excited about you saying the phrase,
I
draw a line.
I was sort of making an off-the-cuff remark about him starting mid-season and then the refereeing standards slipping drastically, even from their already low position. And I know we're joking around on this a little bit, but I don't think it's really that funny because, it's 2 points. Two really valuable points, and I know we'll talk about the game, and I know that there is the possibility that without that, even if that goal had been chalked off, Brentford could have got another goal. It's possible.
Of course, it wasn't the last kick of the game.
No. Yeah. But I do think, this is there's two people in the fucking VAR booth. There's two of them. Why didn't the other guy say, hey, the thing that we're supposed to do with the lines? You should do the lines thing.
I know. I mean, genuinely an extraordinary degree of incompetence. And it is 2 points. And it's not beyond the realms of possibility that 2 points could be the difference for Arsenal this season.
It could.
And, I'm sure we'll get on to talk about the game more generally. And I would be the first to say that I think Brentford were certainly good value for at least a draw in this game. Like if you were looking at it on the balance of play and balance of chances, I'm not sure it's a game Arsenal could come away from and say, well, we absolutely deserve the points. But winning a title often means winning several games of that nature where you're potentially second best and yet manage to get over the line. And Arsenal will feel that they might well have done that on Saturday.
I mean, you were in the press conference afterwards, right? Because you were working at the game and you were there. And I didn't see the press conference, but I read it and I saw Mikel Arteta on Match of the Day. But I mean, would it be fair to say that he was... I mean, look, I saw him. I was sitting about fucking 20 feet away from him the entire game. So I could see how exercised he was getting at certain points throughout the day. I imagine the frustration he felt when he saw that goal go in and then be given, having, finished the game, seen that it was offside, spoken about it to the press. Like the frustration must have been palpable. I can only imagine what the mood was like in Casa Arteta on Saturday night when it started emerging that this what do you call it? What do you even say? This like egregious, I don't know what you call it. Incompetence, oversight. Right? At best, it's an oversight. At best, it is an oversight. Which I find it very hard to believe that two officials both forgot to draw the lines. So, I'm not, I think at best it's an oversight. But he must have been absolutely apoplectic when he found out that.
He was. I'll be honest, though, in his press conference, he was very definitive about it being offside, but he was almost, and if you watch the footage back, he almost kind of laughed because he was like, I got the sense of he was completely incredulous about it. He almost couldn't believe it. And he was asked, like, where did you think the offside was? And he was like, well, which one?
Yeah.
Like, he felt that there was a case for offside against Pinnock, which obviously VAR spent a long time looking at and decided wasn't interfering. But then there's the second one.
Which is wrong, by the way, because it was.
And the second one, which is that they didn't even look at. I mean, we could go further and look at the free kick, which is given, which is not subject to the video, but which I think is very generous to Brentford. I mean, it's clever centre-forward play, but the referee absolutely buys that.
It's quite funny you say that, because the image that I mocked up or just put together for this particular episode is basically that. It's Ivan Toney with his arms
behind his
right
back.
Behind Saliba's back. I mean, it's one of those where, it could go either way. I mean, I don't think it can go or should go to the attacker. It's probably more of a free kick to Arsenal than it is to Brentford, and maybe one of those that the referee should just let go, because it's a tussle between two players who are having a good battle all day. And look, I thought Ivan Toney, as annoying as he was particularly in the latter stages of the game, was brilliant. I thought that was perhaps the best anyone I've seen play against William Saliba, who had a really difficult day. And look, that will happen when you're a young centre-half. I think this is, the sort of day that he will learn a lot from. But Toney was absolutely brilliant for Brentford. But that's never a free kick. Never a free kick.
But I agree, by the way. I thought it was brilliant. I saw the comparison made, and I don't think it's a lazy one, that it was kind of a Drogba-esque performance. And I think that's true in terms of the outlet he provided his team. It was quite extraordinary.
He's bigger than I thought he was.
Very tall.
First time I've seen him in the flesh, so to speak.
Yes. Well, he's very tall, incredibly good in the air. We'll probably feel... even though his goal was offside, he probably should have left the Emirates Stadium with a different one anyway. And he was incredibly fired up. I don't know how much of that you could see from your vantage point, but he was really sort of getting into his teammates, for not making runs beyond him. And I think he'd had a poor game for Brentford in their last league match, and he and his manager had spoken about that in the build-up. And he came in very fired up, and it was a tough day for Saliba. But yes, I mean, the officiating, I'll be honest, I as you know, it's not my hobby horse. It's not my favourite topic, but I felt quite sort of nauseated when it became clear the degree to which Arsenal had been robbed of some very precious points.
Same. And, we'll talk about the game. And maybe we'll save further discussion of the VAR thing, we've got some questions, I'm sure, about this as well. But it's been a staggering weekend for the Premier League in terms of officiating, because the Brighton one you already mentioned, the thing that happened in our game, which is, essentially inexplicable and completely and utterly unacceptable at this level, because the whole thing about VAR and offside is like, it either is or it isn't. They're the easy ones. They're the easy, look, maybe it's only half an arm, but by the letter of the law, so to miss out on that and to miss out on it because, the guy basically forgot to do his job is just, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But then there's
don't forget Thomas Souček making a great save for West Ham.
And then the fucking... The red card, the second yellow card for the Wolves dude.
Oh, yeah.
Who was that, Lamina?
Andrew, he was the third man to approach the referee. Everyone knows the third man to approach the referee gets booked.
What the fuck is that? Did that guy just make that up?
I don't know. That looked as suspect to me as anything. Why book that player and not the others? I don't know. I was very uneasy with that. But... yeah, it was a terrible weekend for the PGMOL and for the Premier League, really. I think it damages, we speak about everything going on with Man City potentially damaging the integrity and the value of the league as a product. But of course, the standard officiating is part of that too. And there is an inequality between the quality of the football and the amount of money that's invested and the quality of the officiating at this point in time.
And it did, it sort of felt like when we'd scored, it felt like this could well be the kind of game that we don't play very well in, but we grind out in inverted commas, title contending 1-0 win. One of those that everybody talks about, that you have these games during a season like that. And look, we have to look at ourselves. We can't just blame VAR. We can't just blame Lee Mason, although I feel like, that's not unfair or unreasonable. There are questions to ask about the way that we played and, could we have done more so a decision like this isn't as damaging?
For sure.
But, to get into that position, and look, here's the other thing, and I said this to you on Saturday night, is in the context of this season, in the context of Brentford's current form and what they've done in other games against big teams this season, they've beaten Man City, they've beaten Liverpool, they've beaten Manchester United, they've drawn with Chelsea, and even, when you look at some of the games, which are tough, but against not big teams like Spurs, they drew with Spurs as well. So I think, as difficult as it is, maybe if you can step back, or if we can step back and look at 4 points from 6 against this Brentford side, it's not bad. But of course, in the moment and in the heat of what's happening with Wednesday's game coming up and the title race and everything else, it does feel really damaging and painful to drop points at home. But you have to acknowledge as well that Brentford are a very good team who played really well on Saturday. We are having, I think, a little blip in form. And that's obviously going to be a point of discussion, I'm sure. So, yeah, it's hard to try and find any kind of silver lining from the result itself, particularly because of how it came about. But, I do think it is, in the overall context of the season anyway, 4 points from 6 from Brentford is not bad.
Yeah, I think, listen, you always interpret results in sequence and in context. And I think in isolation, a draw against Brentford is not no embarrassment or anything like it. But I think obviously off the back of the defeat at Everton and ahead of the Manchester City game, a win would have been hugely valuable. I do think, 3 points for Arsenal in this game would have changed it would mean a different complexion to Wednesday night's fixture. I think it would give Arsenal a lot more comfort going into that than they currently have. I mean, we're now in a position where I think if we lose on Wednesday night, Manchester City take on top spot. So that would be a significant kind of shift in the title race.
Yeah.
If I had to pull a silver lining out of it, it would only be that had Arsenal, had Arsenal dropped points without this sense of injustice, I think that probably would have been more damaging in its own way to the spirit of the players and the fans. I think in a funny way, the injustice of it has become very quickly a potentially galvanizing force.
I think that's true. I think this could possibly be useful in a way, because we haven't been at our best. We haven't quite found our rhythm, and we'll explore perhaps some of the reasons why and team selection and all those kinds of things. But if you're Mikel Arteta and you're preparing the team for Wednesday, you're preparing the team for the rest of the season, you're going big on the fact that these 2 points were stolen. Yeah. I think that is how, if I were the manager, that's how I would be framing it. Brentford, again, played well, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, we got ahead, we scored a goal. We could easily have hung on there for a 1-0 win. Instead, incompetence, whatever else you want to call it, has cost us 2 points. And I would be in that dressing room talking to the players, giving them a bit of a history lesson about 1990-91 when Arsenal were docked 2 points because of the brawl at Old Trafford, but still went on to win the league. And I would be talking about, how we are fighting pretty much everybody You know, Manchester City, Manchester United, all the teams around us, the referees, the PGMOL, the Premier League itself, all of it, you'd be getting them well and truly up for this and saying, look at these charges that they've hit us with 3 times for what? You know, they've taken points off us now. They don't want you to win it. So go out there and fucking win games, guys. And you know, that might be the sort of thing that could just snap us out of this little lull or funk that we've got ourselves into. Yes.
Time will tell on that, because we are, you know, we have dropped off a little bit over the last couple of games. And we should talk about that as well, because as infuriating as the offside decision was, you know, there are certainly things Arsenal could have done better in this game. And Brentford are a difficult opponent. You know, I said this during the match, but I think they get a bit of a disservice at times. You know, people say, "Oh, they're awkward, they're difficult," but like they're very organised. They're very good at what they do.
They played some lovely stuff. You know.
Yeah. And they could well have scored a few goals.
They could, and look, once they got themselves into a position where they had something from the game, you know, the sort of antics, the time wasting, all that kind of stuff got really frustrating. But again, that's, you know, partly on us because of how desperate we were for 3 points, and I'm sure we'll chat about that. But let's, you know, talk first half, because I think Arsenal were not quite there. There wasn't quite enough zip about the way that we passed the ball, wasn't quite enough in the way that we moved about the pitch. Like you say, Brentford had some really dangerous moments. Tony hit was it the post or the bar? I couldn't quite see. It was
kind of the corner, wasn't it? I couldn't quite tell. Yeah. Even after 5 minutes, they had that one Rico Henry sliding in, which, you know, was a great chance, really, after Tony went down the right-hand side. 11 minutes in. What did you make of that refereeing call when Mbeumo went through and was adjudged to have fouled Gabriel? I mean, personally, I haven't seen it many times back, but I think you could potentially list that alongside the poor decisions on the day. I think that was a little bit harsh on Brentford.
Maybe. It's a sort of free kick you see given quite a lot, but it was soft. Yeah. I think it would be fair to say it was
other way around. I'd be very unhappy with it, I think.
Yeah, but also, like, you know, I know he put the ball in the net, but at that point the whistle had gone and Ramsdale
there was a long way to go.
Yeah, you know, so it's not necessarily was going to be a goal. But look, they were very good. They were very good, and they had the best chances in that first half. That's for sure.
My feeling was that because they pressed quite aggressively, and I actually thought that Arsenal's passing out from the back was pretty good. Like, I felt like we took some risks and did it pretty smartly and would sort of get away into midfield. And it was when we crossed the halfway line that we really struggled. And it was kind of the same against Everton, where, you know, they had 3 central midfielders on the pitch, and we just struggled to find the pockets of space that we have done until now this season.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And they doubled up. Thomas Frank was very clear about that post-match, speaking about, you know, we know Saka and Martinelli are, you know, the two, he said, I think 2 of the most informed, most dangerous wingers in the league. And so we knew we had to double up on them, and we did. And, you know, it was a struggle. I mean, we didn't really create anything of note in that first half. Right at the end of the half, there was kind of the Martinelli volley, left foot volley from the sort of 20 yards out. I mean, that's, you know, barely a half chance, not easy to take at all. And yeah, I think they were on balance the better team in that half.
We were better in the second half, though. I think there was a chance from Saka quite early on. There was an Odegaard shot that was at the keeper.
Yeah.
What do you make of the fact? You know, we talked about the Everton performance and not necessarily being at our best that day. And I think pre-game there was a sense that maybe we might see a couple of changes just to sort of, you know, shake things up a little bit. Mm-hmm. That wasn't the case. It was the, in inverted commas, first 11 again. And on one hand, I can kind of understand why, because we've got a big game coming up and he maybe wanted them to play themselves into a bit of form ahead of that one. But what do you make of the fact that when the goal came, it came via a substitute? Leandro Trossard was the guy who got on the end of the Bukayo Saka cross after some good work, nice pass from Martin Odegaard. One of the few times he got any space in behind Saka, and he delivered a great ball. I think it was a good finish as well by Trossard. But maybe, the kind of goal, the kind of moment that comes from having something just a little bit different in the side.
Yeah, I think this is a really sort of fascinating topic, because I think if Arsenal had beaten Everton, I think Arteta would have made changes against Brentford. Maybe that's wrong, but that's my gut instinct, because obviously this is 3 games in less than a week this week, because we go to Aston Villa on Saturday lunchtime off the back of Man City. I think the likelihood of being able to field the same 11 in all of those games was pretty slim to me. And I think had he got the points against Everton, or even got a point, he might have thought, right, home game against Brentford, this is a chance to make some changes. As it was, it kind of becomes complex, because it's the penultimate game before City, which is essentially a cup final. It's not quite, but it has that kind of level of focus and importance. So if you change from your plan A, your preferred 11, the game before City, and let's say you bring Tomiyasu in or Trossard in and they play well, I can see that would put you in a quandary potentially for Wednesday night. But I felt he gave the Everton team a chance to kind of get back on the good foot ahead of the City match. Obviously, it didn't pay off. And now I think it's so interesting, does he stick or twist with this huge game on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, if we talked about this, I think on the preview podcast on Friday, like if you start Trossard against Brentford and he scores a couple of goals, then it becomes very difficult to drop him, if that's the right way of putting it, for the game against Man City. And the thing about the game against Man City as well is that they're not going to come and play like Brentford played, and they're not going to play like Everton played, and they're not going to play like Newcastle
Brentford
played.
Or Newcastle, yeah,
exactly.
You know
what I mean?
It's, in fact, famous last words, but it could suit Arsenal substantially more to play an opponent like Man City. I mean, I found it interesting, Thomas Frank, who I think is a thoroughly impressive coach, by the way, but he spoke afterward and said that he had watched some of Arsenal-Newcastle in preparation for this game. And, the common thread between Newcastle, Everton and Brentford, I mean, there are several, but I think, packing the central midfield area is certainly one. And it's something that we have seemed to struggle with. On Trossard, I think it's really interesting, because I think individually, right now, he is ahead of Martinelli in terms of what he offers.
Sure.
But Arteta's game model, or his kind of tactical plan, is so detailed and so ingrained in the players he's been working with for quite a long time, that my sense is there's a bit of a hesitation to sort of throw someone into that who's relatively new to it. And I empathise with that, but I think, Martinelli is in a little bit of a dip, and Trossard has been very impressive, I think, in the glimpses we've seen. So it's a really interesting one ahead of Wednesday. My gut says he'll stick with Martinelli, partly for that reason, of the kind of knowledge of the system. But Trossard hasn't done much wrong yet in an Arsenal shirt.
No, he hasn't. It's a good goal. And
is it, as tap-ins go, that's quite hard tap-in. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I think even calling it a tap-in is doing a little bit of a disservice.
Yeah.
I know where you're coming from, but I think his movement was sharp, and he had to get there. And from where I was sitting, I thought, oh shit, he's put it wide just for a second, because the angle seemed to be quite tight. So.
I think this is a good moment, because, there was such an explosion of noise when Trossard scored. I think palpable relief. What what did you obviously you were here, you were in London, you were at the game. What did you make of the atmosphere at the match? Because I've seen some discussion online about it and wondered what your perspective was as someone who's not, been to a ton of games this season.
I could sense a nervousness for sure. I mean, there were periods where it was amazing and really loud, and I thought it struck me again that even when things aren't going particularly well for the team, there's like barely any moaning. Whereas previously in other years, you go to a game like that and there's people going crazy, and the overall, it's not to say people weren't shouting things and all that, but collectively there seemed to be just more desire to give the team a lift, a bit of a rise, to try and get behind them. When we weren't going well, there was some good chanting and everything else, but there were also periods where, it was tense and it was quiet and there was nervousness, and I think everybody could see that Brentford were good on the day. They could see that we weren't that great or not as good as we have been. So it's understandable, I think, and the more this season goes on, I think those tensions are going to play out, pre-game, during the game, and everything else. But no, I mean, I think it was still really, really good. Really good. And, there was a bit of pantomime villainy, towards the end with all the Brentford players going down and the time wasting. There's another thing, by the way, how there were only 5 minutes of time added on at the end of the second half is just, staggering to me, because David Raya was taking forever with every single kick. Whether it was a kick out of his hands or a goal kick, that was ridiculous. I don't know where the 6-second rule has gone, by the way, where the goalkeeper is not allowed to hold on to the ball for longer than 6 seconds. I must go back and time some of them, actually, just to torture myself, I guess. But, there was one corner that it seemed to take them about a minute and a half to take the corner. There was the big, long VAR stoppage. There was all kinds of time wasting and shenanigans. And look, I'm not necessarily criticizing Brentford for it. I think we've done it in the past. There are, games where you just make it scrappy and you want to hang on for what you've got. So that's not really on Brentford. They're just doing what anyone would do. But again, the officials and the officiating, to only have 5 minutes was mad. And then, of course, most of that 5 minutes was more injuries and more time wasting.
Yeah, of course.
I know he played on for a bit, but, I'd love to know how much or how often the ball was in play in those last 5 or 7 minutes that it ended up being, which is not a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. On the atmosphere, I was obviously in the press box, so it's not always the best read or the best indicator, but I did sense a bit of a qualitative difference in the atmosphere. I think that the title race is kind of, it's been a long time for everyone, players, coaches, and fans too. And I felt that the pressure of the situation was kind of palpable a little bit.
It's sort of
which is going to happen.
Yeah, it is. It is. The reality of it is now stark. It's, everyone understands it. Whereas I think maybe the first half of the season was like, hey, this is good. Whoa, this is really good. Yay, this is fucking brilliant. And now it's like, okay, right, it's fucking serious now, because what we've got to play for is so big. So I think that will naturally just change the dynamic, because every little thing that doesn't go your way, every result, every performance that isn't quite there, just sort of chips away a little bit of the confidence or a little bit of the belief or whatever it might be. So I get it. Yeah. It's just natural. It's sort of like, the way we often talk about the game state when we talk about a game and how that influences, let's say, the final 10, 15 minutes of a game simply because of what's happening. This is true, and I think applicable to the crowd, But I was really impressed with the noise of it when it did get going. It was so loud, and like I said, in comparison to previous years, I've been at games like this. I've been at performances like this where, every time you walk through and you go take your seat, you're like full of optimism about what might happen. And then, just it doesn't play out the way you're hoping it plays out. But I think collectively, I think the overall atmosphere was still really good. And I think as well, maybe if we talked about the sense of injustice fueling the team and the manager, I mean, why wouldn't it influence the fans on Wednesday night? 60,000 people are in there knowing that we've been robbed of 2 points, and it should be raucous anyway because of that. But every single decision is going to be under the gaze of 60,000 people who think the referees have robbed us, because they have.
Exactly. And yeah, let's have every seat full for that. If you've got a season ticket and you can't go, put it on the exchange. We need every single space in the stadium taken up with screaming Arsenal fans. But you're so right about the kind of game state element to it and the stakes feeling different. I mean, if I think back to what in Premier League terms is only kind of half a dozen games ago, but November, when we were kind of trying to finish top at Christmas, I'll be honest, like, there was part of that I sort of found funny. I was kind of like, we're top at Christmas. Like, this is way in excess of expectations and something we can really enjoy and savor for a good few weeks. Isn't it all good fun? And then, a few games on, because of the positive results, I think, that we had against the likes of Spurs, Newcastle, although it was a draw, and Manchester United, the title discussion and because it feels closer, I guess, it is so much more weighty and serious and real. And with that comes, all those stakes. So it is amazing how it's changed, and it's because of the largely good work we've done,
for sure,
as a team. But it is different now.
So look, it's 1-1, and the goal stood. I was watching Mikel Arteta. The first thing he did was sort of start waving at the crowd to get the crowd behind the team again. Yeah. He did make an interesting change. I'm not sure it necessarily worked as well as we would have liked, but Fabio Vieira coming on for Granit Xhaka was interesting, because we don't normally see him take Granit Xhaka off for a start. No. And it did put another creative player on the pitch. I know Xhaka's done really well this season, got some goals, got some assists, but that is Vieira's thing. I mean, again, he didn't really do it, but I sort of liked the intent of that substitution. Maybe another way he could have done it was put Kieran Tierney on at left back and move Zinchenko into midfield, but I guess he's looking to give Vieira some minutes to try and not to spark him into life, but he's got to start using him. I think there's a discussion to be had, and we'll probably talk about it in part 2 with questions about, squad rotation and using the depth of his squad a little bit more often. But what did you make of that change?
Yeah, I thought it was the right one, to be honest. And I think there might have been a case for it slightly earlier, just because it seemed to me that Arsenal were coming up against a very tightly packed Brentford defence. They're very, very comfortable defending their own box. Anything that you sling in there, they'll get it out. And I felt, particularly in the first half, actually, that we were getting Xhaka on the ball in positions that really didn't hugely suit him. When he had big numbers around him and very small spaces to work in. I actually thought he had a better second half, like most of the Arsenal players. But I think that change is one that we might see more of. And, Arteta has used Vieira as a sub at Goodison Park and on this occasion. So in situations where his team has needed something, he has begun to turn to him a little more, whether that's because of a lack of alternatives or because he thinks Vieira's kind of turned a corner and is ready to make more regular contributions. It's difficult to know at this point in time. I mean, unfortunately, Vieira, what I remember most from the game will be that free kick in stoppage time, which lofted straight into the keeper's arms. But
yeah, I was waiting for the Danny Welbeck versus Leicester moment there.
Exactly.
I was going, don't hit the first man. Don't hit the first man. I enjoyed this actually with a tweet on this from Owen Bannon, who's at Owen_Bannon. He said there was some talk beforehand that the Man City game on the horizon may be a distraction for the players. Do you think that was on Fabio Vieira's mind when he sent his late free kick into the middle of next week?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, to be honest, like a player who I would pick out as making a really positive contribution would be Bukayo Saka. I think he was in a difficult situation, double marked, but in the second half, he had a couple of moments where he really made a difference. There was one where he popped up on the left-hand side and had a shot saved at the near post. And I think his assist for the goal, we probably didn't spend enough time on how good that is. And
the strength he showed to just sort of get that guy out of the way and then deliver with his right foot, by the way.
Yeah, a perfect cross to the far post. That was good enough from Saka to warrant being a match-winning contribution. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be, and Brentford got their point. So,
I mean, I saw a bit of discussion around Eddie Nketiah as well.
Yeah, to be honest, for me, it's less about Eddie Nketiah and more about Gabriel Jesus.
Well, yeah, that's it. I was going to say that, like, I think there is a discussion to be had about not having enough variety up front, not having a different kind of option and what have you. But it's sort of moot, isn't it? Because we don't have anyone else, really.
We've got one centre forward. And even not being able to really change that centre forward for 20 minutes and bring on fresh legs in that position, who could give the centre backs a different challenge is unhelpful. But I think in a game like this, where your primary system-based game isn't quite clicking as you might like, and B, where, it is so crowded and you need someone who can work in tight spaces or drop deeper or drop wide, create combinations. Arsenal miss Gabriel Jesus, and I think it would be staggering if we went the months and months of his absence without that becoming a factor at some point. And it is a credit to the team and the manager and to Eddie that we've kind of got this far. But sooner or later, when you lose a special player, it is going to hurt you. And I feel like we might be in that period right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, to be fair, he did try and get involved after the game. I saw him down at pitch level. There was a bit of little bit of aggro. Some staff members had to be separated and things like that because tensions were obviously pretty high, and that's again normal and part and parcel of drop points feeling bad because of where we are and how significant those points could be. But yeah, we really do miss him, but that's sort of obvious, and we can't really say any more because we don't have another option at centre forward. I mean, do you think we do have a way of mixing it up at all? I've seen people moot Trossard as a false nine option, that kind of a thing, or could you bring on Trossard and play Martinelli down the middle? Although that seems to be something we talk about quite a lot, but which never happens.
Yes, it's fast becoming the kind of Kolo Touré in midfield, isn't it, of modern Arsenal. I think Trossard has done that job for Brighton. I don't feel it's the job he's been bought to do at Arsenal, but it's a possibility. I mean, another player who we haven't mentioned is Emile Smith-Rowe, who I think would have been incredibly useful in a match like this.
Yes, he would.
And who, again, opens up all sorts of possibilities. That if he was to come on the left-hand side, that frees Trossard up to come on elsewhere, potentially through the middle. Or, Smith-Rowe could have been the change for Xhaka. We've seen him a couple of times do that kind of role, and it feels like that might be where they envision him playing going forward. So I do think that the absence of a couple of players is hurting us at this point in time. I don't really see us going with another centre forward as long as we have Eddie available. I think it is going to be a case of waiting for Jesus to come back.
Yeah.
Although with Martinelli struggling a little bit on the left wing, maybe it's not the worst shout, to try moving him inside and see if that invigorates him at all. Because, you could put Trossard out on the left and Martinelli through the middle. I'm not sure Eddie's really done anything to be dropped, but it is another way to go.
Well, yeah, there's not long to wait before we go again, obviously.
No. Which Trossard was talking up as a positive, as players tend to do. I think another home game, whoever the opponent, they'll fancy their chances. But wow, what a big game that is.
Is huge. And obviously they won yesterday, and that closes the gap which of course should be 2 points more than it actually is, but
we do have a game in hand still, of course.
That's
that
true.
is worth remembering. Whatever happens Wednesday night, Arsenal have a game further to play, which is theoretically a home game against Everton. Speaking of bouncing back and exacting revenge.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does feel like a pivotal moment. Will we, at the end of the season, look back on this as a wobble where our faith and conviction was tested and we came through it? Or will we look back on it as the time where we, started to slightly run out of steam? Time will tell.
It's impossible to say, isn't it? You obviously hope it's the former and not the latter. But
I can't be sure. I've never seen this team in this position, so there's very little precedent to draw from in terms of determining. Is this all going to go, back to us winning every week or not? It's hard to say. I mean, we were performing at such an extraordinary rate that I suspect that kind of 100-point pace was probably unsustainable.
Yeah, not quite a reversion to the mean, but something a little more close to that.
I think if Arsenal were going to win the title, or are going to win the title, it was going to probably need to not be a 100-point season to be champion. But yeah, I still think this is a long race with twists and turns to come. But the Wednesday night game against City is hugely important. I mean, the absolute imperative for Arsenal is that they must not lose.
That's true.
A draw is not a bad result in that game.
No, because we do have that game in hand, and we do have a lead as it stands. So
it keeps that City at arm's length. I mean, if Arsenal draw both games against Man City this season, then they'll have, they should absolutely take that, in my opinion. I think they can beat City on Wednesday. And I just think, they have to avoid defeat. Otherwise, the kind of pendulum swing towards City will feel pronounced and, if not fatal, then, significant.
Yeah, there'll be like a sort of inevitability about that in a way because of what City have done in previous seasons and all the rest.
I think once they get the driver's seat, once they get pole position, as it were, I think they'll be difficult to shift. That's just my sense of it,
Yeah. Well, maybe, if they do get into pole position, they might just, forget their steering wheel.
Sure.
That could happen, couldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Forget to put their foot down on the...
Forget to change gear. Forget to check their rear view mirror, all of that kind of stuff.
You are recording, aren't you, Andrew? Because I do know. Oh, no.
Fuck's sake. I knew there was something.
Yeah.
Fundamental. Right. I mean, there are some questions and stuff. Is there anything else you want to talk about in part one? Anything that we...
No, just to say that, if there is a bit of gloom around, I think there was quite a lot of fun stuff this weekend. Spurs getting absolutely battered, obviously.
That was hilarious.
By Leicester. It was really good value. Did Newcastle...
They dropped points.
Dropped points. I'm trying to think. Chelsea dropped points, obviously.
Great save by Souček, yeah.
Yeah. So there was some fun around to be had. It wasn't all doom and gloom.
Wasn't all doom and gloom, for sure. Okay. Well, look, let's take a little break here, and we will come back with your questions and more in part 2 right after this. Welcome back to the Arsecast Extra. This is part 2 of the show where we answer the questions that you sent to us on Twitter at Gunnerblog and at Arseblog, and also on the Arseblog Discord chat server, which you get access to if you are an Arseblog member on Patreon. Before we get into the questions, just want to mention that we've had quite a number of emails from Turkish Arsenal fans or fans of Turkish descent to ask us, if possible, could we mention something about the terrible earthquake that took place there and in Syria last week. And it's obviously a terrible situation. The club, via Save the Children, have made a donation to the humanitarian efforts there. So what we'll do is Arseblog will make a donation to Save the Children via the link that the club have put together. It's through the Arsenal Foundation, I think. So we'll find that, or you will find that in the show notes. And if there's anything that you can spare to try and help the people affected by that earthquake, I'm sure it would be hugely appreciated. So thank you to all the people who got in touch, who emailed, and hopefully everybody in their orbit is safe and sound. And what you can do to help will be really important. So there you go. Right. Do you want to go first?
Hey, yes. There's such a terrible situation there. And yeah, please do give whatever you can. Okay, let's go with this. Gooner Bob on Twitter.
All right.
Hi, Bob. Bob says, why doesn't Arteta put on extra attackers in the final 10 mins like Wenger used to do? Seems like we don't create enough big chances at the end of these games. We are drawing or losing. Can I venture an answer?
Of course. Well, he doesn't really have any.
Well, he hasn't got any. Yeah, I mean, that seems to me to be one of the primary issues. He can't throw another centre forward on because he hasn't got one.
I mean, we did have the young winger on the bench. Kosher Dubry.
Who seems to have kind of made that last spot on the bench his own over the last few weeks.
Yeah, because, I mean, we don't have Reece Nelson. We don't have Gabriel Jesus. We don't have Emile Smith-Rowe. I think, you know, as and when they're back, you know, he'll drop down again. But I do wonder sometimes, like, could you just have a little bit of a Hail Mary? I just don't quite know how exactly you make that change. You know, where do you put him and for who in the final stages of a game? Because, you know, Brentford were good and could still threaten, and they had a really late corner, didn't they? If I remember correctly. Yeah. You want to see Arteta's face when that corner was being taken. Holy moly. You see him sort of muttering under his breath like, don't.
Well, I say don't lose Wednesday. I think losing here would have been really damaging as well. And perhaps that was in his mind.
I suspect so. I think if the game is playing out in such a way where you are already on top, you know, and you're looking to pile on the pressure, then maybe you can take a Hail Mary with a young guy like that. But, you know, sacrifice a fullback or two even for another attacker. But I think the primary reason right now anyway is that he just doesn't have those options.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we saw in pre-season, and I think we've seen it a couple of times this season, is him switching it up and using Saka and Martinelli as kind of wing backs and having two strikers on the pitch in Jesus and Nketiah. He has done that from time to time, but obviously that was kind of dependent on him having two strikers to call upon. I think as well, we have to bear in mind this is a coach who is very wedded to structure. in a way that Arsene Wenger was slightly more relaxed about.
Mm-hmm.
Arteta's entire kind of tactical ethos is based around positioning and structure, whereas Wenger was more of a kind of enabler of improvisation. And I think it must be very hard for him to divorce himself from those principles. And in fairness to him, like I can recall one or two occasions where Arsenal have gone a bit Hail Mary with their changes and have slightly come apart at the seams because, if you take out all the sort of kind of key pieces or you change the build-up play, then you kind of stop being what you are. So, but I think the primary thing is just not having the players at his disposal to really chuck at it. I don't think he's ever going to be Wenger. I don't think he's ever going to be, let's have 4 strikers on the pitch. I think that is a fundamental kind of difference between the two managers. But I think there's more he could do if he had the options available.
Right. Here's one with loads of questions about what we do to break down teams that play with a deep block. So Colin R on the Discord says, with the blueprint of a compact deep block, Everton, Newcastle, Brentford causing Arsenal issues and struggling to break down these sides with our current system, how do they crack this issue? Is it a structural change needed in these matches or a personnel change? And Shan says, with Arsenal struggling to break down low block teams, this being attributed to likely doubling up on defenders on our wingers and a lack of overlapping support from our fullbacks at times, do you think it's time to switch to traditional fullbacks for games against low block teams?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because on the one hand, I think, well, we've seen it against Everton and to an extent against Brentford. Is this going to be a bit of a blueprint for teams playing Arsenal? Is it the nature of being top of the league and everyone knowing how good you are and how taking you very seriously? I mean, I saw Thomas Frank in the build-up say, in order to get a result, Brentford will have to play at the highest level they've played in the Premier League since they were promoted. And afterwards, he was like, I think we got very close to that. People come to the Emirates Stadium very respectful. And so it may be something Arsenal encounter quite frequently between now and the end of the season. On the other hand, I do think, Dyche and Brentford are quite specific tactical problems. And I actually think, rightly or wrongly, most teams in the Premier League do kind of have aspirations above that at this point in time. I think like most teams come and try and play their football. So I'm not sure how often Arsenal are going to find themselves in this position.
Early goals.
I mean, goals change games is the cliche.
Early goals were a feature of the first half of the season.
Yeah.
So even if you are going to face a team who nominally are going to play deep to try and frustrate you, when they're a goal behind, naturally they have to come out a bit. They have to be a bit more expansive.
Change it. Yeah, I think that first 20 minutes is right. Arsenal had a decent first 5 minutes, I think, against Brentford, and then it kind of all swung in the other direction. But you've got to sustain that early pressure. I also think the key when you're playing against a deep block defence is to capitalise on the moments where they have come forward. So there were a few instances in this game where Brentford did press very high. And like I say, Arsenal's movement of the ball and escaping the press was pretty good. But I didn't feel they always capitalised on the situations they created. I can think of one where Eddie Nketiah was running with the ball in the first half and had Gabriel Martinelli kind of just outside him, and I think didn't feed him when he was running into space, and the move just kind of died a death. You have to be clinical in those moments when there is space available to you, I think. Yes.
That's a good point.
But yes, I mean, obviously the doubling up on the flanks, I don't think it's coincidence that Saka's assist comes at a time when Ben White has made an overlapping run that's kind of dragged someone a little bit out of position and tired them out a bit. Is overlapping fullbacks the way to go? I mean, I'm not sure Tomiyasu's I'm not sure he's that much more overlapping than White anyway within the system.
I think they're quite analogous, to be honest. I think they're not exactly the same player, but the same kind of player, because we talked a lot about Tomiyasu's ability to play inside, which allowed then Kieran Tierney, the other side, to sort of overlap. Whereas Tierney does give you something a bit more of that. He can overlap.
He does. He does. It is a different quality to Zinchenko. I think the idea of the current system is obviously that, Martinelli holds that wide position, and if he rolls in field, Xhaka or Vieira or whoever it is in that role is kind of supposed to provide that wider option. But it's not quite proving as successful as it did in the first half of the season. I mean, we had this question from Adam Benabez on Twitter, and Adam said, do you think that we are seeing the limits of Xhaka as an advanced number 8 against these low blocks?
Yes. Yeah, I do, actually. Which isn't to be critical of him, but I think maybe when you are facing a team like this, and when they are playing in that specific way, you might need somebody with a little more craft, a little more creativity, maybe a bit more nimble, just a little bit quicker between the lines. So, I think Xhaka's been really good for us this season. I think he's played a huge role in us being where we are, but in the context of these kinds of opposition, I don't think that's unreasonable at all. What about you?
I agree. I think Xhaka's been brilliant, and in most games, I'm picking Granit Xhaka. For example, against Manchester City, I really want Xhaka on the pitch in that position. But I think against this type of opponent, and that's why I said I might have brought Vieira on sooner, and if Emile Smith-Rowe was available, I certainly would have considered using him there. I think it suits him less. And yeah, like I said, he was getting on the ball in areas where I was like, this does not really benefit him. And actually, when Arsenal have all the possession on the halfway line, and it's kind of Zinchenko, Gabriel, White, Partey knocking it around, Xhaka almost becomes kind of a bit absent in that, because you're probably not giving him the ball with his back to goal, 30 yards out, with 2 markers on him, because that's not where he wants to receive it. Whereas a more technical player, might take it on the turn there and give you an option.
Yeah. What did you make of Zinchenko at the weekend?
I thought he was okay. I didn't think it was his best game. I thought his delivery from wide areas probably wasn't as good as you would expect. I thought he was okay without being at his usual level. What did you think?
I just thought he took a few too many touches.
Right.
Like, I wanted him to move it quicker, and we talked about this a little bit in the Everton game, didn't we, when we were discussing Martinelli being available on the left-hand side. Not that he was free, but there was space for him, but the ball never got there. The ball didn't get there quickly enough, and often the ball didn't get there at all, even when it was Zinchenko who's got the ability to play those passes. So, yeah, I do wonder. But look, I think Arteta's got huge faith in him, and given the fact that we're playing Man City on Wednesday, I don't see him making any kind of change. But I was just curious about his...
Yeah, I think it's a valid question. I mean, would you change it for Wednesday? Seems an obvious question, but... No, because I do think the way City play, not that it suits us, because, it's kind of weird to say you're better playing a brilliant team, because you'd much rather play a crap team who are really badly organised. Unfortunately, there aren't too many of those in the Premier League now that Frank Lampard is gone. So, teams are organised. But the fact that City will look to get on the ball, will look to, come forward and attack, I think in some ways, like you said, does suit us better, in the sense that when we get the ball, we're going to be able to move people around and get the ball to them in areas where perhaps they can run into space, if that makes sense. There was a lot of players in the last couple of weeks receiving the ball with basically nowhere to go but backwards. There's not much in front of them because, the teams are sitting so deep. So it might well suit us. So let me ask you this one. With a couple of questions like this. Chicken marmalade flakes
on the Discord said, a long one, I'm afraid. According to the Athletic Football Tactics podcast, coming into the weekend, Arteta has made the least changes, 14, from game to game of any manager, and our subs play the smallest proportion of games. Are we seeing the impact of that now? Which has caused the biggest problem? An over-reliance on key players, even though they might be out of form, fatigue build-up among those key players, or a lack of match practice for the fringe players or subs? And is it all of the above? And we had a similar one from David Baratunk, who said, how worrying is it that Arteta never rotates? What message does it send to players like Tomiyasu, who is finding a bit of form but then dropped right away for Ben White? Is he not good enough? If he isn't, then how can we trust him, etc., etc.? So what do you make of that? The sort of trade-off between consistency of selection and the ability to change things when it's not quite working the way you would like. It seems to be, right, we will just let these guys play themselves back into a bit of form rather than, okay, look, it's not going that great for you the last couple of weeks. You have a sit down and this guy's going to come in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talked about this in part one a bit. I think 2 weeks ago, we probably would have all said the consistency of selection has been one of the defining, underpinning reasons for our success this season.
Yeah.
I certainly would have said that. I think that's been true. I accept that we've not looked quite as good in the last 2 league games. And then I think you sort of enter a situation where it's like, well, who does Arteta really trust that's not in the starting 11? And I guess, Tomiyasu would be one. Smith Rowe, if he was fit.
Jesus, if he was
fit. Like, I'm not sure. Tierney, maybe. But, I'm not sure there are... Trossard, maybe. But I'm not sure there are a ton of options that make it easy for him to change. I think it's as simple as he played the City team against Brentford to give them, as you say, an opportunity to sort of get back on the horse. Because they didn't really, that's where it becomes really tricky. I think he will stick with his best 11. It's like that old question of if it's the Champions League final tomorrow, what does he pick?
Yeah.
And this is not quite that, it's up there.
I do think it is fascinating, though, because at the end of the first half, we were talking about, what will the team do? Is this a blip? Will we just sort of respond and kick on? And you said, we don't really have any precedent for this team, and I get that, but we sort of do in the sense that we saw what a very small group was able to do last season, and it didn't quite have enough to get over the line. Mm-hmm. Because maybe there was, I don't know if you can say too much reliance on certain players, but we didn't have the options that we needed when, towards the end of the season, players picked up a bit of injury. Your playing players, I think there were some guys in the last few games of the season were pretty much on their last legs, Mm-hmm. So maybe there's precedent there, and that should be something we're a bit more attuned to, that Mikel Arteta needs to be a bit more attuned to, because I think there is a need when it's not quite working. It's not punishment to drop somebody if they're not in good form. It's just football. That's what happens at every level of football, Yeah. And I would have been completely comfortable with, say, Trossard or Tomiyasu starting against Brentford. Yeah.
But my gut feeling is that there won't be changes for Man City, and there will be a number of changes for Aston Villa, almost irrespective of the City result. I just can't see that he could play the same 11 across these 3 games inside 7 days. Hold my beer, says Mikel Arteta. But I'm convinced there will be changes. And I'm sure it seems like it's almost been planned that they will be against Villa. And it wouldn't surprise me if we saw, Jorginho, Trossard, Tomiyasu, Tierney at Villa Park. I probably if it was in my hands, I probably would have made a change or maybe 2 changes for Brentford with the City game in mind, and just sort of to kind of find out what I had as well.
Yeah.
In terms of the depth of my squad. But I do understand the reasons that Arteta felt he shouldn't.
Yeah, like if we win, it works out and everyone is like, okay, yeah, fair play. That worked, but it didn't work, and it only sort of adds to a little bit of the already palpable tension and nerves ahead of Wednesday, because now it's like, well, do you stick again or do you twist a little bit? What do you do? Like,
it makes it awkward.
Yeah.
I mean, so another thing that I think is worth saying is Premier League season is very long, and I doubt it's ever the case that what you're doing on game 1 of the season is what you're doing in game 38. I think it requires a measure of evolution, because you're competing in a league where you are constantly being analysed. And I think there is kind of a tipping point where clubs are wise to you and you are sort of required to evolve.
It's incumbent on you to do something different, because everyone not has got you worked out or sussed you out, but they know where you're most dangerous. So this is why Saka and Martinelli are doubled up on all the time now. All the time.
So you know, as much as you might have your ideas and your principles and your way of playing, I think the length of the season and the quality of the competition requires you to make adjustments as you go on. And I'm sure those are happening and have happened, but this feels like a point where, you know, we just need to slightly recalibrate. But I do think City is so different. Like playing against a Brentford or playing against an Everton and playing against a Man City are so different. I think the closest sort of analogy we have would be like the Man United game, for example. And that was much more suited to us. So I'm sort of weirdly optimistic about Wednesday.
In terms of performance level or result?
You can never guarantee a result, but I think we'll perform. I mean, it's fascinating. I was chatting to Sam Dean at the weekend, and he said to me, who's going to have more of the ball in that match? I think that's such an interesting question, you know. Arsenal have been doing Man City for half the Premier League season. Who's going to do the Man City thing on Wednesday night? And could it help Arsenal if they don't have all the possession and they're hitting City on the break with, you know, the speed and power that we have on the wings? I don't think that's impossible. It's really, that's going to be, I mean, I think if you look back at every Arsenal-Man City game over the last, I don't know, 6 years, I'd venture Man City probably dominated possession in all of them.
Probably, and certainly last season when they were playing with 10 men.
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and check that and see what the statistics say.
But you know, is this the moment that changes? I just think it's a fascinating tactical battle. And obviously it's Pep and Arteta, so there is a chance that one or both of them will do something mad. I mean, as much as we say Arteta might pick the same 11, what there is precedent for is him mixing it up against Man City.
Yeah. Let me ask you this one then, because we've got a question from Gunnar Gwiggs on the Discord. He said, morning chaps, there might be a chance that Haaland has picked up an injury resulting in him being out on Wednesday. My question is, with all this talk of Haaland arguably making City, in inverted commas, worse, would you rather we had this apparent worse City with him, or prefer him to miss the game but then perhaps revert a bit more to the City of old, I think is basically the question.
Well, forgive me for being a little dubious about Haaland's injury. They were 3-0 up at half-time when he was withdrawn. So, you know, I think this would be heavily into the kind of precautionary end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I absolutely expect him to play.
Yeah, me too. And And actually, like in terms of like who has possession, you know, the one thing you don't want against Haaland is space for him to run into. That's where he's really dangerous. Well, he's dangerous in lots of places, but he's particularly dangerous there. As for the whole kind of does he make City worse thing, I think what we are witnessing is a process of integration and adaptation where Man City and Haaland are learning about each other. And what that has done is create a window of opportunity for Arsenal, I think. And I imagine that window is quite briefly ajar. Like I expect next season, because Haaland is an outstanding player and Man City are an outstanding team, I expect by the time next season rolls around, they will have figured this out. And that will be absolutely horrible for everyone else in the Premier League. But while they are still figuring out, we have this chance to capitalise. And that's, you know, another reason I think that this season feels quite so big and so important and like such a fantastic chance. Because I have to be honest, I think a player of that quality and a coach of that quality in the long term, I expect they'll figure it out.
I think that's absolutely spot on. Like, I don't think City don't play to the strengths of Haaland. That's not the way they play football, right?
No.
But I think they've got the ability to combine what they do with a bit more of what he does. You know, receiving the ball in space, getting it to him early. I mean, look, Manchester City, if we're complaining about teams playing in a low block against us, pretty much everybody plays in a low block against Manchester City because they make you play in a low block because of where they put you on the pitch. You know, they dominate possession, they force you backwards. So they're well used to playing against teams that sit deep, whether by choice or otherwise, you know. But yeah, I think he'll play. I think he'll play on Wednesday. There's no two ways about it. We
need Saliba to look more like the Saliba we saw at the Etihad in the FA Cup.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, he came on and kept Haaland pretty quiet in that second half. Whereas Rob Holding obviously had a bit of a problem with him in the first half. And, you know, let's hope Saliba, the game against Ivan Toney, is one that he learns very quickly from, because I'm sure Erling Haaland was looking at that as well. Whether City will play in the same way as Brentford, because they were quite direct, weren't they? You know, every goal kick was coming out. It was being launched towards Toney in the Saliba zone, if you like. And that was very, very obvious and very deliberate. Whether City will do exactly that, I don't know. But yeah.
I imagine so.
31 goal striker making you worse is, I mean, I get the overall thing, but I would be quite happy if he was out. I'll say that.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
Go on, your turn.
Yes. Well, this is a slightly more somber note, but Sean D. Guna said, just wondering if you saw the post-match statement from Brentford re the racist abuse Toney received on social media. Absolutely disgusting that so-called fans would do such a thing. Should our club also investigate? I think Arsenal have said they are cooperating and working with Brentford on that. But yeah, very sad, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, there's no excuse for that. Like I was talking about at the end, you know, when he was coming off, like the sort of pantomime villainry. But that's all it is. You know, it's pantomime. It's just sport. There's absolutely no excuse or condoning any kind of racist behavior, or, you know, going out of your way to troll his Instagram or whatever it was. Is that how it happened? I guess
so.
You know, what the fuck? You know, no, people like that don't represent Arsenal or the values of Arsenal fans. And if the club can help Brentford in any way with the investigation, then they should absolutely do that. You know, there's no, I don't know, what can you say other than it's just so fundamentally wrong and abhorrent, and nobody should be subjected to that. Whether they've done a few things on the football pitch that might have annoyed you, there's no excuse for it whatsoever. And I hope they do throw the book at whoever it is if they can find out who they are. In as much as that happens on the internet, which, it doesn't really, which is another discussion, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I did have a question here or two because, those final minutes when Brentford were very obviously slowing the game down, et cetera, and we had a couple of questions like this. For example, Alexander Kussel, who's at Alex Kussel, said, what are your thoughts on players using head injuries to waste time? Ben Mee was down for a considerable amount of time and there wasn't even contact with his head. It seems to be happening more often than ever as a time-wasting tactic. And JDH, who's at JDH_14, morning, gents. What can be done about the growing trend of players using apparent head injuries to slow attacks? Of course, player safety is paramount, but against us and in other games, players go down cynically holding their head, knowing that the ref will stop the attack. And I think this is true. I think there is a growing trend of this happening, but I don't quite know what you can do about it.
No. I think the only thing you can do is add on the appropriate and correct amount of time afterwards in stoppage time. But I don't think on the one hand you can say we need to take head injuries more seriously and these players need immediate treatment, and on the other kind of call into question whether or not it's legitimate, unfortunately. I don't see a solution there. Very tricky, isn't it?
It is because you can completely understand the protocol that if a player has got a head injury, then you stop the game because it could potentially be quite serious.
I mean, is there any, I'm not a doctor, so for God's sake, no one take my advice, but is there any mileage in the possibility of saying, well, if a player goes down with a head injury, there's like a 20-second window within which you have to blow up. So if a team scores within that, it counts, but
I don't know.
I don't know, man.
I don't know.
That feels risky, doesn't it?
Has he got a bump? How big is the bump?
Yeah.
If the bump is more than 3.2 centimeters, then immediately stop the game. I don't know. But then you're a fireman. What would you know about head injuries?
That is very true.
But no, I think you're right. I think you're right about the added on time. I think the Premier League needs to do better in that regard. I saw some people talking about, a ball in play clock being introduced, which would be interesting. But again, changes that happen at this level of football mean that the top level game gets further and further away from the grassroots game. How do you implement those sort of time measures, at Sunday League level and things like that? And we already have a bit of a distance with technology and VAR and those kinds of things. Someone's dad doing the line, though, based on the officiating, they might be better at it than some of the guys. Can I ask
By the way,
yeah, go on.
I just wanted to jump in because, as you know, Dale Johnson, ESPN's resident VAR expert, has published his kind of weekend.
He should have a theme tune, shouldn't he? There's a barman waiting in the stand. What's he said?
Includes the following. Mason, who failed to disallow the Brentford goal, was the Premier League's first full-time VAR and is into his second season, but has made 6 confirmed mistakes this campaign.
Christ.
He was responsible for 2 errors one weekend in September. On the goal in question, Mason correctly judged that Pinnock had interfered with his opponent, depriving him of the chance to close down Tony. This was enough for the offside defence, but Mason has to be sure he was offside. There was no camera angle which clearly showed Gabriel's right-hand side, the part of his body closest to the goal, which is needed for an offside decision. So actually, the argument appears to be that Pinnock was fouling Gabriel, but they couldn't prove he was offside.
But they showed that on Match of the Day.
Listen.
Didn't they? They showed... How can, the VAR people not have the same cameras as Match of the Day?
I don't know. And then on the final Norgard offside, it says Mason had taken 2 minutes and 20 seconds to judge the first offside. considering the possible foul and then the offside offence, trying to find a usable camera angle. Once he's cleared that aspect, the rest of the attacking phase is checked, and it seems it was rushed. The goal was awarded after a further 14 seconds and one check of the phase. Yeah, and then he goes on to say, PGMO has admitted this is an error. You can possibly excuse missing a marginal offside further back in an attacking move, but to miss it against the player who created the goal is a huge error, which I think is the major issue, right? Like, they spend so long on one offside. What about the guy who actually gets the assist and sticks it across? I know we've been over this.
It was very, very offside. Mildly, but still offside.
The solution proposed is that semi-automated offside technology, as used in the Champions League, would eliminate problems such as being unable to map Pinnock or missing Norgard, as all 22 players are mapped, and the VAR is given an instant notification of an offside player. The human error aspect is removed. I mean, that, unfortunately, I think that, if you're going to have technology, then it has to be as accurate as possible. I think I think that the reason this feels so egregious and so infuriating is that VAR it sort of exists upon the promise of objectivity and accuracy, but the reality is, of course, it's still human, and thus errors are made. But I think offside is something where you should be able to achieve a greater sense of objectivity. So I think that the automated tech has to be the way to go for the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, remove the incompetence of idiots like Lee Mason, who can't be trusted with their own eyes. Yes. And this isn't, like he said, he's made 6 mistakes in his a season and a half.
Season. Yeah.
The one I think in September was incredible.
It's 6 confirmed mistakes this season.
Fucking hell.
Yeah.
Sorry, that guy just isn't good enough at his job. We had a question actually from Shaheen Mahdi, I think it is. He's at Shaheen Mahdi 91. He said, "Hi there, gentlemen. The question on VAR and officials may be saturated for today, but my question is what you believe should be the appropriate sanction system for referees to go through, and whether a separate VAR accreditation should exist to operate in the role." So if, I think, sort of fleshing this out a little bit, a hugely experienced referee like Lee Mason, whatever you might think of him, he's got a long career as a referee. Like, do you need to be a referee to be the VAR guy? Once you understand the rules, should you have to have been a referee to be a VAR official? I think that's quite an interesting one because...
No, yeah, perhaps not. Perhaps not. I think it could be a completely different pathway, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Not something that we just put out old referees to pasture doing.
Yeah, and sorry, I know I'm not generalizing in any way, but, there is an element of technology, and some people, as they get older, find technology difficult to deal with. I'm not saying that's exactly what it is here, and I'm not saying that anyone who isn't, or is old can't use technology. Of course, that's nonsense, but I do wonder if that might be part of it.
Well, also, this is a sport where it produces a huge number of kind of highly able video analysts.
Yes.
Something that a lot of people are doing on an amateur level, but increasingly it's a common role in the game. People who spend their lives watching footage of football matches and analysing it from every possible perspective or from a data perspective. And those people are there to be potentially called upon for the ranks of the VAR. So, yeah, I think that's wise. I mean, there is always human error in this league with the way it's set up right now, and sometimes it goes for you and sometimes it goes against you. I mean, I can think of a goal that had a big impact in the title race that should absolutely never have stood, and it's Bruno Fernandes rather against Manchester City, right?
Yeah.
Which is obviously that helped Arsenal that week, but I do think the fundamental here is that if your pursuit My personal opinion is that I can. If the premise is human, then I can accept human error. But if the premise is objective fact, then you have to do all you can to eliminate the human aspect.
What about sanctions and things like that? That one of the continued complaints about the PGMOL is that there appears to be little accountability, and I accept that it's sort of difficult, right? But what happens is, a high-profile referee makes a mistake in a big game at Premier League level, and then they're sort of, left on the sideline maybe for a couple of weeks if the mistake is egregious enough. They might get sort of left out for a couple of weeks, but then sort of slowly they're the fourth official, and then they're back in and they play a game. Or maybe, which I always found really, is patronizing the right word, is like, okay, you've made a mistake, you're down to referee in League One tomorrow. It's like, you fucked up, so we're going to just foist you on another couple of unsuspecting teams. Feels more like punishment for the teams than for the referee. But the lack of accountability, the lack of transparency as well in decision making, I think is something that Howard Webb, in his new role, should address and should try and make try and make a bit of progress with that kind of stuff. So is there anything you can think of that, I don't know. I mean, these are people's jobs, but like if you're bad at your job, you get fired, regardless of whether you're a referee or a VAR guy or a taxi driver or a fireman. You're still getting fired if you don't put out the fire.
The trouble, I guess, for the referees is if they really hang someone out to dry, how do they ever rehabilitate them? Do you know what I mean? Like,
sure,
they have to kind of punish them, but in a subtle enough way that the opinion of that official doesn't sort of too much infiltrate the public consciousness, because I think then it becomes completely unworkable and unsustainable. So you'd like to think there are things that they do, like taking them off high-profile matches. For example, we spoke about the video assistant referee who might be in line to work with Arsenal City on Wednesday. But a bit like Mikel Arteta making substitutes, I guess at the moment Howard Webb is working with a pool of people that he's got, and who knows what exists outside of that. So there is an issue here. There is definitely an issue around quality and availability of high-standard referees. But the Premier League is such a rich and powerful organisation. It's something they have to get a handle on.
Well, I mean, it does
begin to affect them.
It does feel like they have the, like you say, the resources to really incentivize a career path that would be attractive to people. Because I can completely get that, like, who wants to be a fucking referee? Because at every level of the game, you get shouted at, and people on the sidelines and players and all that kind of thing. I think there is a cultural difference the way referees in football are treated as opposed to many other sports, where any kind of dissent or any disrespect of the referee's role is severely punished, and sometimes on the pitch, So I think that's something that's so ingrained in the culture of football that it's going to be kind of hard to change. But at the same time, if the difference between a title is 2 points come May, there is going to be an outcry of massive proportions, isn't there? So you also have the expectation that people in these highly paid jobs and very well trained, up-trained as well, are capable of doing what they're supposed to do. But I think you're right to say that the Premier League has to do something about the overall standards, and whether that's investing more in making a career pathway for referees, like a good career, then maybe that's something they have to consider, because it might widen your pool of options. When things do go wrong, it's not as damaging because, you've got a greater pool to choose from, or there's a better quality, a higher level overall. And we haven't even talked about the geographical element to it, the inclusivity element to it. There is a lot to do. There's a lot to do at refereeing level.
Well, the standard of officiating appears to me, at least, to be substantially better in, say, the Champions League or even the major FIFA competitions like the Euros or the World Cup, or UEFA competitions. And in the 90s, when the Premier League was growing and expanding, there was a massive gulf, I think, in the sort of caliber of English players that were being produced to foreign players that were being produced. And the way that clubs and the league responded to that was by beginning doing a lot of work on kind of the academy side to kind of eventually be able to match up to the likes of Spain and Germany. But in the short term, recruiting foreign players who came in and elevated the standard of the league. And so I would suggest a similar two-pronged approach to Premier League officiating, whereby you create a career path, not quite an academy system, but an education system for referees that is rewarding, well paid, open to people from every background to apply for. And in the short term, you go and get the 10 best referees, that you can from world football, as you have done with the players, and you pay them appropriately and elevate the product at the same time. That, to me, it feels like a no-brainer. And, this is supposed to be, people say the Premier League is the Super League. Well, then go and get refs suitable for the Super League.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Where are we? I think we have to do a couple of quick ones to finish. First one, very simple, from Darren Kemal, who's at Delboy_8. He said, "Good morning, gents. Not a football-related question, but I need to know, is James the voice of the latest Costa radio ads? Costa Coffee. I keep hearing a voice that sounds very much like his. I need to know, is it him or a James impersonator?"
No, it's me. It's me. I'm in bed with Costa Coffee.
Right.
Look forward to all that Costa Coffee PR on The Athletic.
Right. I see. So you're getting into the... muscling into the old voiceover world, are you?
To the voiceover.
Oh,
game.
I see. Well, how would you like it if I turned up tomorrow in a show called Horrendous Histories? How about that? You wouldn't like that, would you?
Surely, Andrew, there's room for us all to have a piece of the pie or a sip of the coffee.
There's so many radio ads out there.
A sip of the delicious Costa Coffee. I actually haven't heard it. So I'm on quite a few, but I never hear them. I don't know what radio stations they're on.
It's strange, yeah, because you often do them. I don't really listen to the radio, so you go in and do these ads, and then someone will go, "Did I hear you do an ad for blah, blah, blah?" I go, "Yeah, I think so, but..."
Yeah. I know. Well, keep an ear out, guys. You might hear me promising you some delicious Costa Coffee.
There you go. I'm sure you've got some vouchers or something.
I haven't, actually.
No, I know. You never get anything like that.
You never get anything. The only time I got something free was when I was acting in a Kellogg's Crunchy Nut ad. And it was for Kellogg's Crunchy Nut clusters, which are actually delicious. The problem was that on the day, I had to eat like a lot of Kellogg's Crunchy Nut. And they give you like a thing called a spit bucket. I mean, it doesn't take a great leap of imagination to work out what that is. But it's so you don't have to swallow all the Crunchy Nut that you're eating. But the experience of sort of masticating Crunchy Nut and... throwing it, spitting it back out all day, meant that when they, at the end of the day, gave me a few boxes of Crunchy Nut, I was like, to be honest, guys.
Yeah, no, you can keep these.
You can keep these.
Yeah, that's fine.
I want them now, though. It's been years. So if Crunchy Nut are listening, feel free to...
Have some Crunchy Nut clusters, please,
They
Mr.
are delicious
Kellogg.
Crunchy Nut clusters.
I've never had the Crunchy Nut clusters.
They're good. And
right.
My contract with them has long since expired. I'm not obligated to say this.
This is genuine, real
It's my actual opinion, guys.
Okay.
I don't have strong views on anything, but I think Kellogg's Crunchy Nut clusters are nice.
All right. Final one from Arse Thoughts, who's at _Arse Thoughts. He said, now that the stadium art has mostly gone up, it's interesting to see how they fare at a bigger scale. For example, I wasn't the biggest fan of the 1886 artwork when I first saw it, but I think it's bold and brilliant on the stadium. Which ones do you think pop in real life? And yeah, I mean, I had a walk around the stadium on Saturday to check out all the new artwork, and I have to say, they're fucking brilliant. I think they look so good. They look so good, and it really sort of freshens up the outside of the stadium, but I just love what they are as well. I love the work that everyone on those sort of committees did, the artists, obviously, for putting that together. People who design fonts, for example, who we might know. But I do think they look fucking great. And in particular, I think the Highbury one is just off the charts. Off the charts. It just looks so good as that huge panel on the side of the stadium and the various details and everything else. But I just think it fits so well. They look amazing.
They do. I mean, that one is pretty great. I completely agree about the text-based ones, that they're kind of less exciting to look at as a little JPEG on Twitter. But when on the stadium, they're very, very impactful. I think that 1886 one is very cool. I think the Highbury one might be my favourite just because it sort of marries... You know, it's brilliant from a distance because you see that sort of Art Deco facade and have all those connotations, but then there is so much detail within it. So it's sort of rewarding at both distances. But, you know, credits to the club. They look fantastic. And I think there's still one or two to go up.
I think there are, yeah. I love the one with I was sort of, again, when you see it as a picture, the one with all the various flags of the supporters groups from all over the world. But it looks great on the stadium. And I think it just shows you what a global club Arsenal is. That the support that we have from every corner of the world is now represented on the outside of the stadium. And just going back to the Ivan Toney thing in a little way, you know, this is a club that is massively inclusive, you know, people with fans from all over the world. So for anybody to sort of level racist abuse at an opposition player, you know, it just is completely contrary to the values of Arsenal as an institution, you know, the best values that we have as a football club. So, I mean, I think those things, they just look so good. And it was amazing to see people walking around all weekend, like loads of people getting to the ground early and just sort of wandering around and looking up and taking pictures. And I ran into Clive actually outside. He was taking pictures of the one where the guy at the front kind of looks like you. You know that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do know the one you mean.
Yeah. I was going, Jesus, he did well to get himself up there.
I'm right there, front and centre.
Fucking hell. Like, there you are in your old kit.
I know.
Martin Keown. And then, okay, it's not James. It just looks a little bit like him. You should tell people that's you, though. That'd be amazing. Yeah, there I am. There, yeah.
I will, yeah. I'll hang around outside that one, waiting for people to kind of ask me.
Yeah.
No, they look great, and it's very cool. I'm looking forward to seeing the extra two. I think there's two more to come.
Because there was two blank spaces, so I don't know exactly. There's the fans collage and another one.
And I think this one about the academy, but I'm not sure.
See, I do have the which one didn't I see? I do have the pictures. No, I don't know. We'll find out in due course, though, I guess.
We will.
Okay. Well, look, we'll leave it there for now. There's still plenty to come, of course. Over on Patreon, we'll have our preview podcast for the Manchester City game. We'll also have an episode of The 30, looking back on the weekend's Premier League action. That'll be tomorrow as well, Tuesday. So 2 podcasts for you tomorrow over on Patreon. We're going to do an extra Arsecast extra for you on Thursday. This is a big game on Wednesday. As such, it deserves some big podcasting attention. So we'll have an extra for you on Thursday. Do join us for that. In the meantime, take it easy. Hope the nerves aren't too jangly between now and Wednesday night. Thanks as ever for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.
Bye-bye.